All right, Build Kansas Advisory Committee, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We do have a couple of individuals that are online. I believe President Masterson and then also Representative Vaughn, and then Senator Clays is going to be joining us shortly. So let's go ahead and get through the agenda. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting that we had on June 12, 2024. I think in the time that we've had here, we've been able to review the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes? Representative Francis makes a motion. Representative Helgerson seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, minutes are passed. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the presentations that we have. As Mr. Volz and I were discussing before the meeting, this is probably the longest list of applications that we've had because I think we had 3 additions late to the agenda. And so I'll go turn it over to the applications for the Build Kansas Matching Grant Fund. So Matthew Volz with the Kansas Infrastructure Hub, and on behalf of the Build Kansas Steering Committee, Mr. Volz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I appreciate you sneaking those last 3 in as well. And you're right, we have 15 to review today, so it's a lot. Before we get started, I'll go through some really quick reminders about the process that we undertake with the Hub. So the bipartisan infrastructure law, we fund match dollars for grants that are part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Reminder that it is 60% formula funds and 40% discretionary funds, which are the funds that we're really seeking to bring here into Kansas with these grants. Our workflow is such that we, in the Hub, we get applications from the entities, we check them, we review them with the steering committee approves them, then we bring them here to the advisory committee for advice. Up in the upper right corner of the slide is the process where we receive notice that the applicant has received a federal award, and then we notify the state treasurer about that process, and we develop a agreement for the Build Kansas funds with the state treasurer's office, which is depicted on this slide. I know it looks like a very complex process and a lot of boxes. It is. But it is something that we have worked out with the state treasurer's office, and we now have an agreement to transmit to our applicants. Thank you to the state treasurer's office for getting that done. Just a reminder on the process that it's a 2-step process for the Build Kansas Fund. On one leg, they apply for their federal grant, and another leg, they apply for the Build Kansas funds. And then once we receive approval of the Build Kansas funds, we give them an award letter. They then can include that in their federal grant application, or if it's past the due date, they can submit these award letters after the fact as well. We don't select projects. We don't really judge them based on their merit. If they meet our means test, the steering committee typically approves that project. One of those is, of course, that it is a grant that is coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and we do also ask that they submit their application prior to the federal grant being due to the federal agency that's in charge of that grant program. Just a quick reminder, this slide right here shows the nature of grant awards and winning grants. Right now, the total Build Kansas funds that the steering committee has approved is just over $124 million. In this slide right here, you can see that $22,641,700 have actually been committed or have received a federal award. And another portion of this, large portion of this, $34 million plus, has not received an award. That money will have to be restored to the Build Kansas Fund. And then you can see the vast majority, we're just waiting to hear whether or not the applicant has received a federal award. So this process is long. It requires a lot of patience, and you know, we're not going to win everything. That's for sure. But we are winning a portion of these grant funds that are coming out of the federal government, and they're coming here to Kansas. All right. Real quickly, today, again, we have 15 applications for review. Just over $5 million in Build Kansas Fund requests. We're going to keep these in numerical order, but they all fall into these 4 categories that are on the screen right now. So it's either CRISI, which is Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Grants, Airport Infrastructure Grants, Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program grants, or Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC grants.
I believe we have some questions before we get into the applications themselves. So Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a way that you can get to us, just send it to by email, those that have been awarded and those have not? Because you don't have that in here, do you?
I don't have it in here, but yeah, I can.
Okay.
Get this. Yeah, we have 9 that have been awarded. So
Right, but the 34 million that this 34 million have gotten back that they're not getting the award. Is that correct?
correct. And there's 9 projects that have been informed that they did not win an award.
I think it'd be nice if we had that. And I mean, just myself, I think it'd be nice if that was part of our packet every time. So
Absolutely.
appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So is the approval ratio from the federal government about 50-50, or is it less than that?
Way less than that.
Way less than that? Okay.
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
just wondering, when we have sent off applications of about $124 million and $67 million is outstanding, where we're at on that, $50 million annual allocation.
yeah. So it's complex in the fact that some of this money goes back into the Build Kansas Fund. So some of it was FY24, some $50 million is FY25. And the way Merle was doing it is he was apportioning the projects per fiscal year. Now with these credits that go back to the Build Kansas Fund, essentially just builds up our fund a little bit more for fiscal year 25. Now, as far as the approval rate from the federal government, I mean, almost all of these programs are oversubscribed, way oversubscribed. So that means there's a lot more applicants for that money than there's actual money to dole out. I would say that if you have a hit ratio or win ratio of roughly 300 to 400, it's like a batting average, really. I mean, if you're batting 300 to 400, that's really good in this field of grant writing. So if we can achieve that, I'd be very happy.
And committee, we do have the documentation of those that have been awarded, and so they're being passed out right now. Committee, any further questions? Representative Helgerson.
Do we have to take any formal action on the 34 million to return it back to the fund, make it available?
I don't know. I mean, I've basically been informing the KLRD, and the KLRD has just been putting it back in.
Okay, thank you.
I think we had indication from Jill Walters, our advisor, that no, we do not. Because since those were, in a way, not awarded from the federal government, then that money was not taken out of the $50 million. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, Mr. Volz, you may continue.
All right, first one, number 2024-051 is the City of Dodge City. And this is a consolidated rail infrastructure and safety improvements grant. They are asking for $354,000 from the Build Kansas Fund, which will unlock $1,416,000. This project is for a study in Dodge City. It's a 2-mile corridor along the La Junta subdivision of the BNSF, which also serves Amtrak's Southwest Chiefs passenger service. Again, it's a 2-mile long corridor, 6 grade crossings, and essentially they're going to be looking at upgrading and doing some investments on those grade crossings. Again, this is a planning study. Total project cost is $1,770,000. This application was received on May 17th to the steering committee, was reviewed by the steering committee on June 12th, and it was recommended. So it comes to you today for final advice.
Has there not already been a study completed?
In this area?
Yes.
I don't know.
Representative Francis.
And didn't they state on their application that they don't need the funds? They're just worried about how it's going to affect the ability for them to fund future projects?
Yeah, I mean, they stated that they didn't want the funds, or they don't need the funds?
They didn't need, that they wouldn't have to have the funds to do this project, that they had the resources. I think it says the City of Dodge City and their partner BNSF will accommodate the cost share of this project if Build Kansas is not available. However, this funding would reduce the available resources for subsequent work efforts. And did you guys look into that? Is it BNSF's funds that are going to supplant this, or is it Dodge City funds that'll supplant this if it's not funded by us?
So, okay. So BNSF For the past couple of years, they have been investing their own funds into these grant programs. And they've been investing funds, they've been supplying match dollars. And if they can get a city, so if let's say there's a corridor or a grade crossing that they have high on their priority list to rehabilitate or do a study on, they will ask a city, hey, would you mind submitting a grant application? We'll supply the match funds, and we'll even supply the money to write the grant itself. And they've been doing this. Now, in this case, I think what the city is saying is that, if Build Kansas Fund does not supply it, hey, we'll get BNSF to supply it. I don't know if that's a guarantee, but I have seen that history from BNSF here in the state of Kansas.
Representative Francis.
I just want to say, it just kind of concerns me when we're supplanting funds that a private enterprise would use to do this anyway. We're cutting other communities short, possibly.
Well, and I would say that was, the discussion when we created the Build Kansas Advisory Committee and during the legislative session of 2023. And I think we've had a discussion, and we're going to have a discussion at probably the end of the presentations of the applications in regards to matches from communities. And that, we'll get into that at the end of the meeting. But it seems like to me that there are funds that can be used. They're just going to the Build Kansas Fund to have those allocated instead of using their own dollars.
Sure, yeah. I mean, they're a private entity. I mean,
And that was not the intent of the Build Kansas Advisory Committee.
No, I agree.
Representative Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering on page 8 where it says sources of proposed non-federal match, I think that's 4 or 5 lines down. Dodge City, it looks like, was putting in $254,000 and BNSF was putting in $100,000. So it's not the total, is it? So even if they say BNSF will cover all of it, maybe it's part of that public-private partnership is what I'm looking at, is how they're designating this. Is that right?
Mr. Volz.
Yeah, and so this application here is basically what they're saying is if Build Kansas Fund does not supply the match dollars, we're going to do this with our own funds and we're going to do this with BNSF funds. So, I mean, they're applying because the money is available. So it's up to this committee to decide whether they want to.
Well, that will be up to the committee to decide whether or not we want to forward this on or not. Any other questions in regards to this particular application? We're going to move forward as we have in the previous meetings when President Masterson was the chair. So if there is any concern in regards to this application, now it would be to express that. Otherwise, we'll just generate by consensus and send it on. Senator Schallenberger.
Well, I have concerns about it, so I'll say that right now.
You want to express your concerns?
I'd just as soon not do it, but
Is that a motion?
I'll make a motion that we reject it.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion to reject. Is there a second? Second by Representative Francis. Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
No.
Representative Helgerson.
You had mentioned that we were going to have a discussion about the matching requirement at the end of the meeting.
Yes.
It seems a little premature. I agree that there's questions about the whole matching. But if we're making a decision now to take this out before we get to the discussion on the matching, it kind of preempts that final discussion.
Well, this is going to be a holistic discussion on matches, not just per application, because we didn't really come to a consensus at the last meeting. And so there's been some discussions from the last meeting that we had on June 12th until this meeting. So we're going to have a discussion about matches. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wasn't there another project, I can't find it in my notes right now, also that had a link to BNSF and some kind of a funding source there as well? I don't remember if it was 1 or 2 other projects. And I don't remember if it was, if you don't do this, BNSF will take care of it.
And we'll address that if we get to that application, and that happens to be the case.
Okay. I'm just bringing that up because there's more than one, and I don't want to have different conversations about each of them. Thank you.
Then I would say that the committee needs to be consistent on our decision-making process. Okay, since that one has been rejected, we'll move on to the next application. Mr. Volz.
All right, the next one is from Osage County, and this is a number 2024-052. It's another consolidated rail infrastructure grant. This is, Osage County is asking for $148,634.10 from the Build Kansas Fund, which will unlock $792,715.20. And they are committing $49,544 of their own funding towards this particular project. This one is to support a transload facility in Osage County, southeast of Olivet, to support economic development in the rural farming community. This one here does not have any railroad funding, but it does have funding from Osage County to assist in the matching dollars. This one was reviewed by the steering committee on June 12th and recommended. It comes to you today for final advice.
Committee, any discussion? All right, seeing none, we will generate, like we have in previous meetings, on consensus. As there's no consternation about this application, we'll consider it approved. Next application, Mr. Volz.
All right, City of Sabetha, number 2024-053. This is an FAA airport infrastructure grant. They're asking for $36,223 from the Build Kansas Fund. This will unlock $326,000 in federal funding for a total project cost of $362,223. With this project, they're going to construct a taxiway extension at the Sabetha Municipal Airport, which will allow them to get to a new T-hangar they've just recently constructed there. This was reviewed by the steering committee on June 12th, 2024, and recommended, and comes to you today for final advice.
Committee, any discussion on this application? All right, seeing none, again, on consensus, that one is going to be sent off and approved.
Thank you. City of Ellsworth, number 2024-054 is another FAA airport infrastructure grant. They are asking for $13,048 from the Build Kansas Fund, which will unlock $117,429 in federal dollars for a total project cost of $130,477. And they are going to be constructing a new snow removal equipment storage facility at the Ellsworth Municipal Airport. This was reviewed by the steering committee on June 12th and recommended. It comes to you today for final advice.
Committee, any discussion? All right, seeing none, this one proceeds as being approved by consensus by the committee. Mr. Volz.
All right, next is City of Topeka, number 2024-055. This is a U.S. DOT Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. And this one here, they're asking for Build Kansas funds of $3,328,030. This will unlock $13,312,123 for a total project cost of $16,640,153. This project is to address 7 projects outlined in their recent Bikeways Phase 5 study. And this will be to add on-street bike lanes in several locations throughout Topeka. This application was reviewed on June 12th by the steering committee and recommended for approval. And it comes to you today for final advice.
All right, committee, any discussion? Representative Hoffman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I think that this is one that I would like to see some cost share on it. So, and I'm not sure this money is really made for bike lanes. I'm not sure bike lanes is something that's really big, important. So I'll make a motion that we do not accept this one.
All right, committee, been a motion to not accept, seconded by Senator Schallenberger. This will ask for discussion on the motion. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this tied in? I think I saw a press release recently where they got $20 million for bike lanes and stuff. So this is in addition to that $20 million. And didn't we also help with that $20 million through Build Kansas?
Mr. Bolts.
Yeah, so they received a $25 million raise grant, and it was not one that we had supplied any Build Kansas funds for. They funded that one on their own, the match on their own. We did supply technical assistance to them, but they funded that one on their own.
And how much was their match on that one, do you know?
It would have been 20%. Yep.
Any further discussion on the motion? Representative Helgerson.
I can't remember, where are the bike lanes?
They're scattered throughout the city. There is a
On the
map.
streets?
Pardon?
Are they dedicated areas on the streets?
Yeah, they're dedicated bike lanes on the streets. Correct. Yeah. There's a map in the last page of the application that identifies the 7 locations that they want to put these at. I
Senator
will just
Reddy.
say the active transportation infrastructure investment program, I mean, the nature of it is active transportation. So you're going to see, all of these are going to be related to bike lanes and ADA accessibility and sidewalks.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am in support of this project. I think when we just look at bike lanes and say that's not what transportation money is for, I think we're kind of not looking at it in a comprehensive manner. I know a lot of people that use their bikes to go to jobs. That is their mode of transportation. And in this generation, that is more so than in previous generations. And I'm not sure we really defined what we mean by infrastructure funds to be used for, if bike lanes are also part of that infrastructure for roads and how we designate where vehicles or multimodal transportation is used. So because I feel like it is a more holistic plan in Topeka and part of their economic development as well to get to work and such, I am in supportive of the project.
I believe Representative Vaughn has a question on WebEx. Representative Vaughn?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I wanted to also say that I'm opposed to this motion and support the underlying application. While they did not include a match in this project, it's clear that it is a commitment to their city and that they have put money towards these types of projects in the past and are looking to expand those efforts. Not everyone can afford a car, and bikes are an important form of transportation for people's quality of life, but also getting to jobs, being able to access resources in the city. So yeah, I think this is a great project and I'm supportive of it. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think there are some other ones that are going to be bike ones. Maybe the bike lanes do frustrate me. I'm not sure that it really frustrates me when we take a 2-lane road and we make half of it a bike lane, and now all of a sudden we're down to a 1-lane road. But my biggest issue with this is the city of Topeka is big enough that they should be putting in some matching grant or some matching funds. So that's my reason for putting this forward, and I'll renew my motion and close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Mr. Volz, you may go on to the next application for the City of Goddard.
Okay, this is the City of Goddard, number 2024-056. This is another US DOT Active Transportation and Infrastructure Investment Program grant. They're asking for $90,000 from the Build Kansas Fund, contributing $30,000 of their own for a total project cost of $500,000. This will unlock $380,000 in federal funding. This is for planning and design of bicycle and pedestrian bridge and part of their active transportation network. This will be for the planning and preliminary design of a proposed multi-use bridge over US 54. This was received in the Build Kansas Fund application was received on June 6th, reviewed by the steering committee on July 10th, and recommended. and comes to you today for final advice.
All right, committee, any discussion on this application? Representative Francis.
And you might have said that. I was trying to read it real quick, but they did put a local match in this one, correct?
They did, and I'll just qualify that a little bit because what they did is they went over the 20% minimum. And the reason they did that is because they actually get a higher rating from the federal government who's reviewing these applications if they have just over 20%. So they went above and beyond. So the Build Kansas Fund is supplying $90,000. 10,000 of that is from the city of Goddard, will make up the 20% match, and then they added 20,000 to that then to get that higher rating in the application.
But there's $30,000.
It's 30,000 total, correct, yeah.
Any further discussion on this application? All right, seeing none.
I have a quick question.
Or Senator Clays.
You had said that the city added 20,000. Couldn't they have asked for 20,000 less from the Build Kansas Fund? Aren't we really the ones adding 20,000?
Mr. Volz.
Well, so they did ask for an exception essentially to be able to go over that 20% minimum. Typically, the Build Kansas Fund will fund up to that 20% minimum, whatever that minimum match requirement is, and then we stop right there. But they said, hey, we want to be able to add more to this application in order to get that higher rating. We ran this through our steering committee, and the steering committee agreed that it would be better for them, better for the state of Kansas if they got the higher rating in order to increase their chances of winning this grant.
Senator Clays.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to that, but I think we need to be credited with what's actually happening here, and that is that the city of Goddard is putting 30,000 in, and they are asking for an additional 20,000 from the Build Kansas Fund so that theirs is more attractive to the federal government. Not necessarily opposed to that, but let's be clear about what's happening here.
Duly noted. Any further discussion in regards to this particular application? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on. And again, by consensus, this is considered approved. We'll move on to Trego County.
Thank you. This is number 2024-057. This is a FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC grant. This one, they are asking for $46,500 from the Build Kansas Fund. They are committing $31,000 of their own funding. This will unlock $232,500 in federal funding for a total project cost of $310,000. And this project is to install a new generator at the Trego County Lemke Memorial Hospital. And basically it's going to be able to keep their power on, so that'll provide them resiliency for medical equipment, life support systems, and their data systems at the hospital. This was reviewed by the steering committee on June 26th and recommended. And it comes to you today for final advice.
All right, committee, any discussion on this particular item for Trego County? Senator Reddy.
Yes, thank you. I'm not opposed to the project, but I just wanted to make sure this is for the generator. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and does that fall into the definitions that we've laid out for infrastructure funds?
Yes, we've funded generators in the past, and when we do our steering committees, we actually have the agency that's leading sort of that particular grant program, so in this case, Kansas Division of Emergency Management, and we have them give us their input and advice on this, and KDM did say, yes, this one does qualify for a BRIC grant.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and based on consensus, this will be forwarded on and approved. All right, next is the City of Clay Center.
Number 2024-058, City of Clay Center is asking for $318,750 from the Build Kansas Fund, which will unlock $956,250 in federal funding for a total project cost of $1,275,000. Again, this is another FEMA BRIC grant. This is going to be to construct a storm shelter, a dual-purpose storm shelter attached to the new Clay Center Multi-Generational Life Center. And then when it's not being used as a storm shelter, it'll be used for community events and other events as well. This one was reviewed by the steering committee on June 26th and recommended. And it comes to you today for final advice.
Committee, any discussion on this application? Everybody is sifting through their pages. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and forward this on by consensus and consider it approved. Next application is the City of Chapman.
Number 2024-059, again, City of Chapman. This is another FEMA brick grant. This one, they're asking for $10,500 in Build Kansas funds. They are supplying an in-kind service, which is the electrical hookups for this particular project, which is for tornado warning sirens. If successful, it'll unlock $31,500 in federal funds for a total project cost of $42,000. And again, this is for the installation of 2 new warning sirens to cover parts of the city that are not covered right now. They had recently experienced some tornadoes in the area, and they want to have better coverage throughout the city of Chapman. So we approved this, the steering committee approved this on June 26th, and we'll bring it to you today for final advice.
Well, I know in the comments, obviously, when I was driving in here today, I just drove through Chapman. And it's a fairly small city in Kansas, and it says that they don't have the funds budgeted, and they used ARPA dollars for other purposes to buy them. Was there any elaboration on the additional project contribution of the in-kind electrical?
They basically said that their city utility is going to install the poles and the wiring and do the final hookup for the warning sirens. They did not give us any indication of what the monetary value of that might be.
Right. I was just like, it's one of the few applications that said in-kind contribution, basically. Any discussion on this particular application? All right, seeing none, by consensus, this one is moved on to the federal government and approved. Now on to the City of Coffeyville.
Yes, number 2024-060. This is a US DOT Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program grant. They're asking for $470,000 from the Build Kansas Fund, which will unlock $1,880,000 in federal funds for a total project cost of $2,350,000. And this one is to essentially enhance accessibility. 8 locations in the city of Coffeyville where they will provide ADA accessibility, sidewalk improvements. And of course, this has an impact as far as active lifestyle, reducing emissions, increasing health, and increasing the safety of vulnerable road users. This project was reviewed by the steering committee on July 10th and recommended, and it comes to you today for final advice.
All right, committee, any discussion on this application? Representative Hoffman.
I'm not sure this will go, but I'm going to make, I would make a motion that they put in, well, we fund it 95% instead of the 100% of the cost share. Basically, they would put in 5%, which would be what? $30-some thousand or
$5,000 of the 470.
Yeah, whatever the 5% would be.
Or it'd be
23,000. So they would put in 23,000, but we would fund this up to 95% of what they're asking for.
470.
Of the 470.
All right, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Francis. Discussion on the motion. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like sometimes we're changing the rules in between. Is there a reason we're asking for that? Did we ask that of other projects?
Representative Hoffman.
Well, I think we're seeing in other projects that they are putting in something, and this is a sizable amount of money, for one thing, but I think we're going to have a discussion later. 5% seems to be what's kind of the, what everybody's thinking maybe should be a local cost share, so I'm just going to go with that.
Senator Reddy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't mind us talking about that when we do come to that discussion. but it doesn't seem consistent with what was asked of the applicants at the time when they applied. And I feel like we're changing the rules in between and sending it back. I think some have, like we said, that was the first time we heard of an in-kind. Some we did, even if they didn't give any percentage of a local match. So I would like to wait for that discussion at the end for future projects and not go retroactive on these even before we have that discussion.
We do have the motion on the table, so if it fails, then we'll have that discussion. Senator Representative Helgerson.
Sorry, both are right. Really? Deadline, if we put this off, are we going to run into any problems with the deadline?
Mr. Volz.
Well, okay, so the federal deadline for this particular grant program is tomorrow. And so all of these applicants are essentially waiting for us to send them an award letter so they can include that in their application tomorrow.
So if we require them to come up with a 5%, we're basically telling them they're not going to make it. They can't put the application in this grant cycle.
Mr. Volz.
I mean, if they chose, I mean, if they find out today, I mean, if we tell them today, hey, you know, it did not get approved, then, and they still want to put it in tomorrow, then they're going to have to put in a letter of funding commitment from their own city. And it's one thing we tell a lot of the applicants is, you know, again, our process is very long and extended, and sometimes we don't get an award letter to them before their applications are due. So we tell them, make sure you've got a letter of funding commitment from your local agency first. And then if you get one from us, great. And if it's in time before you submit your grant application, great. If you have to submit it afterwards, you know, then you have to do that.
Representative Helgerson.
Thank you. The issue of the 5% or the matching, you know, has some real validity. But we haven't instructed them that they had to have a matching requirement in, and now they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place in that they may lose the opportunity for this grant. We may want to look at a policy going on in the future, but allow these grants to go with what we had told them or what they understood previously, just so they don't lose the opportunity for the grant. And I mentioned that we may want to carry it again later or have that discussion later. But I think that it's one thing to kick them out of the grant cycle. I have some real sympathy, as you might guess, about a matching program though. Got them both.
Representative Hoffman, then Francis. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I understand that. I think anybody, though, that has been watching this committee for the last almost 6 months will know that we have been talking about and been saying, hey, we're going to start requiring some matching funds from some of these applications. So I'm not sure it's something that is just off the radar. I also say if we're just going to rubber stamp these and say, okay, this is what they asked for, this is what we're going to give them, let's go on, and not have any discussion on them of why we should maybe cut it back a little bit, then we might as well not be meeting. So I'm going to stick with my 5%.
Representative Francis.
And this may be a question for you, because I may not understand the process, but nothing about us requiring them to have 5% of that $470,000 precludes them from submitting their grant tomorrow.
Mr. Volz.
Only if they say, hey, we can't come up with that extra 5, or we can't come up with the match dollar.
Can't come up with $23,500.
Well, if we reject this right now, they're going to come up with $470,000.
Right, but if we do 95%, then they have to come up with $23,500.
Correct.
Right. I mean, nothing about us only approving 95% precludes them from still filing a grant tomorrow.
Yeah. Again, if they said, we just don't have it, yeah.
And I guess, let's see, I had another thought, but I think I've turned 65 this year and I may have lost that train of thought. Oh, I know what it was. And also, to one of the earlier questions, the prior group that reviews these prior to us, do they just rubber stamp everyone that comes through, or do they come back and say, hey, we don't really want to necessarily fund this amount. Can you guys do something to improve the application?
Yeah, hardly. So our
Hardly?
steering committee is made up of 8 agencies. And what we do when we review these applications, if the application is from US DOT, we give Kansas DOT the first opportunity to give us comments and review and give us their feedback, and then all the other agencies do that as well. But they review them, they look at these. Now, to the earlier point, the rules right now say they don't have to supply, a match. Build Kansas Fund will supply that. So that's how our steering committee looks at that. They have to look at the rules that they have right now and the means test that they have right now.
So you're telling me there's never been an application that came forward to them asking for 100% funding, and they said, well, maybe we don't want to do quite that much?
No, there's been some applications which were very excessive, and we have said, this is maybe a little bit too much of an ask. And we've
You
asked
have
them-
asked for additional contributions in addition of what they asked for?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to reiterate some of my colleagues' comments, I think 5% also seems arbitrary to just say, we want a local match, so we're going to say 5%. We don't know if Coffeyville can afford $23,500. It's a really small town. These are unprecedented funds that we have available to help small communities in Kansas that, these are opportunities they may never have again in our generation. So it seems overly punitive when we're trying to make a point about the fact that we want some kind of match, even though that's not a conversation that we've fully had yet, to choose this number and to make Coffeyville a victim here. So I understand the greater point that we want to have this discussion to try and make it, I think, with this application that is due tomorrow, and we don't know whether or not Coffeyville can afford a 5% match, seems overly punitive. And, I'm here for the larger discussion about this local match, but I don't know that this is the place. I want to be here to support small communities in Kansas to get unprecedented federal dollars for future generations. So I do not support this motion. Thank you.
Senator Clays.
I think my question was largely answered, but I do think that 1% of the overall project cost is a minimal request of the good citizens of Coffeyville or any community across Kansas, really, that is that size. So supportive of the motion at this time. There's nothing that says that we can't come back and amend a motion at a later date if the city of Coffeyville does come back and say that they are just fully incapable of supporting $23,000 if they are running at absolute peak efficiency and every tax dollar is going towards a absolutely critical use in their community and cannot be spared for a $2.35 million project. We'll see how it goes.
Any further discussion in regards to the motion? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the discussion here just proves that we are even discussing the percentage. But if it is due tomorrow, and let's say they could afford whatever percentage this committee is requesting, oftentimes the elected body probably needs to come back and have a meeting and vote on it, since it is also their taxpayer funds and they can't just have their city staff write out the check for it. So I think there's also that element of giving them enough time, even if they want to have a special meeting, to make sure that's done with the public interest and knowledge as far as the public notice is concerned as well. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll reiterate, I think, what Senator Clays was saying. This is we're asking for 1% of this, for them to pay 1% of $2.3 million project. I think if this $2.3 million project is important enough to them, they will find the 1% that they need for it. So with that, I close my motion.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. All right, we are moving on to the application for the Flint Hills Metro Planning Commission, Manhattan.
Okay.
Mr. Volz.
This is number 2024-061. It's another USDOT Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program grant. They're asking for $119,670.20 from the Build Kansas Fund. This will unlock $478,680.80 in federal funding for a total project cost of $598,351. This project is to plan, design, and do public engagement for 4 trail segments in the Flint Hills MPO region, 2 trail segments in Manhattan, Kansas, 1 in Ogden, and then 1 in Junction City. This was reviewed by the steering committee on June 26, 2024, and it was recommended for approval. It comes to you today for final advice.
Committee, any discussion on this particular application? Representative Hoffman.
I'm going to make the same motion as I made on the last one, that we only pay 95% of the cost share.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Senator Schallenberger. Discussion on the motion. Representative Helgerson.
Again, when's the deadline on the federal grant?
It is tomorrow.
Tomorrow. As was mentioned earlier, that would require them either to have cash available and or to have an emergency meeting to stipulate that the funds are available, which is going to be difficult for for many of the entities. So.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be opposing this motion, same reason as previously. We're kind of changing the rules in the middle. If we advised the applicants ahead of time that there is going to be a certain ask for a certain local match from their government agencies, they should know that. And I think they did it, as well as the steering committee, with the criteria we have in front of us. We are kind of, without even having the discussion that we're going to have at the end of the meeting, we've kind of already made a decision and made decisions to move those to the front of the meeting without coming to any conclusions on ourselves as far as it's 1%, 5%, 10%, whatever it might be. So I will be opposing this motion. Thank you.
Senator Schallenberger.
Just for easy math here, what would that local match be? So we're talking 119,000 is 5%. So it's $5,000. And can I ask, Flint Hills Metropolitan Planning Organization, you may know this better than anybody. Is that that's not a town, that's a regional planning organization?
Correct, yeah.
Volz.
I mean, well, it's a metropolitan planning organization, versus a rural planning organization. But yeah, it is an official MPO in the state of Kansas.
So how are they, do they have a tax levy? How are they funded?
They're funded partially through federal government and as well as Kansas DOT.
Senator Schallenberger.
Thanks.
Representative Francis.
And I don't always understand the timelines on all of these things, but this $5,983.51 that they'd have to have, what's the earliest time that they would have to have that money? I mean, their grant's got to be accepted. Actually, I don't know what time their cost share actually gets paid to wherever it gets paid, but,
Right.
It's not like they've got to have that $6,000 tomorrow, correct?
Mr. Volz.
Well, to Senator Reddy's point, when you submit these grant applications to USDOT, what they're going to ask for is a letter of funding commitment. And to your point, a lot of times these have to go through a political body. Either a city council, has to be signed by a mayor. Sometimes the timelines to get those things done, one day is not enough. Sometimes they have signature authority, but most of the time when I've dealt with these smaller towns and cities or even larger towns, I mean, they have to run this through a process, put it on an agenda, get it approved by city council, get it signed by the mayor. So yeah, there's probably not enough time for them to be able to get this letter of commitment.
But they don't have to write a check tomorrow. They have to write a check when they get awarded the project and when they start to expend funds at a certain point in that process.
Correct, yeah. Once they're awarded a grant, yes.
I know as a former county commission, on occasion, I was told about a grant that we had received, and at that meeting, we found out that we were going to have to come up with funds to be able to receive the grant very much after the fact.
Yeah.
And that may not apply to these federal grants, but I know it happened to me as a county commissioner.
Senator Clays. Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate Senator Reddy's point in my last comment that I feel like we're changing the rules before we have agreed as a committee to what that rule change is going to look like. And it's to the detriment of these communities who have told us that they need these funds. And I guess my other point would be, we heard at the beginning of this committee meeting that there's a really small percentage of these applications that ultimately get approved. So, I think we should be doing everything we can to move these projects forward instead of making it harder for these communities to access these funds. And this is just another way of making it more difficult for these communities to see the ultimate benefit here. And so I'm opposed to this motion. And I wish that we would have this discussion about local match before starting to make this a requirement for these communities when they don't know, what the rules are when they've already submitted these applications. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close on your motion.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
I would say on this one, the noes appear to have it. Noes do have it. Motion fails. So we're back on the application. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move this application forward as approved by consensus. Next, we're going to Morton County.
Number 2024-062, this is a FAA airport infrastructure grant again. They're asking for $37,334 from the Bill of Kansas Fund. This will unlock $336,000 in federal funding. Total project cost of $373,334. This will rehabilitate runway at the Elkhart Morton County Airport, fix some turnarounds, and fix a connecting taxiway that will eventually be removed and abandoned from the airport. This project was reviewed by the steering committee on June 26th and was recommended for approval, and it comes to you today for final advice.
So just to reiterate, they do have a local match in this one. 37,000?
The local match is the Bill Kansas Fund of 10%, $37,334.
All right, Senator Schallenberger.
Okay, I'm confused. Total project, I'm looking at page 6, and I may be wrong. I am most of the time. Total project cost $894. Build funds $336. Local match $37. AIP funds $468. Local match $52. What? Is there no local match?
Well, okay, so they're using their airport improvement program funds, which is a Federal Aviation Administration program, which is allocated to each airport. So they're using that for part of the funding for this project, in addition to the airport infrastructure grant and the Bill
grant and our money and their money.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I think you said no. Thanks.
Any further discussion in regards to this application? All right, seeing none, this one is forwarded on and approved by consensus. Next, we are moving on to Stanton County.
Number 2024-063, another airport infrastructure grant. This one, they're asking for $49,778 in Bill Kansas funds. It will unlock $448,000 in federal funding for a total project cost of $497,778. Again, this project is to rehabilitate or reconstruct runway 17-35 and a parallel taxiway and do some new lighting at the Stanton County Municipal Airport. This one was reviewed by the committee on June 26 and recommended, and it comes to you today for final advice.
All right, committee, any discussion in regards to this application for Stanton County? All right, seeing none, this one will be forwarded on and deemed approved by consensus. Next, we have the City of Hutchinson.
This is another airport infrastructure grant. This one here, they're asking for $97,888 in Bill Kansas funds. It is a 90-10 federal local match requirement. This will unlock $881,000 in federal funding for a total project cost of $978,888. And this one here, they're going to construct an aviation taxi lane at the Hutchinson Regional Airport. This project was reviewed on June 26 by the steering committee and recommended for approval, and it comes to you today for final advice.
All right, committee, any discussion in regards to this application for the City of Hutchinson? Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I'm reading this right, on the last two or three, there's multiple grants that they have applied for. And back to Senator Schellenberger's comment. So some of those grant funds, they have put in local money.
Yeah.
And some of them, they're asking us to put in the local money.
Yeah, and if I've got this correct, the airport improvement program funding is allocated to the various airports in the state of Kansas, and they get that money each year, and essentially they can build that money up and then pile it all together and then use it on a project of a bigger nature, essentially at the end.
Right. So if on page 6, it says here that their local match is $7,200. That's for the $64,000, right?
Correct.
And then they're asking us for $97,000 for the $800,000.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And they're not providing any match to the AIG grant.
Right. Okay. But they are putting some money into the project.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion on the application? All right, seeing none, this application is deemed approved and forwarded on by consensus. And the last application we have is the City of McFarland. Mr. Volz.
Number 2024-065. This is a FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC grant. City of McFarland is requesting Bill Kansas funds of $7,587.50 to unlock $22,762.50 in federal funding for a total project cost of $30,350. And similar to the previous application, this is for tornado warning sirens for one siren in the City of McFarland. Currently, they have no warning sirens in City of McFarland. And again, they are providing in-kind services in the form of electrical connections for the new siren. This was reviewed on July 10th by the steering committee and recommended for approval. It comes to you today for final advice.
All right, committee, any discussion in regards to this final application? There's a lot of conversing going on over there, but I don't think necessarily has to do with the application, so we will deem this one approved and move it on to the federal government. Okay, so that is all the applications that we have today. I think we're going to move on then to the discussion, obviously, which I think is up to the discretion of this committee. But I'll go turn it over to you, Mr. Volz, in regards to the discussion on matching funds.
Sure. Thank you. So at the June 12th Advisory Committee meeting, you asked us to consider possibility of the hub asking for a match from eligible entities. Currently, we have no match requirement. I think that's been stated today. We have a means test, which, you must submit your application prior to the federal funding or the federal deadline, and it must be a BIL funded grant. And we do also ask that you make sure that you don't have any ARPA funds that are available or other means of funding these grant matches. So what has been asked is what if we were to have the expectation of a match? Now there's two approaches you could take to this. You could take the approach of, hey, just give us what you can, which is sort of the way it is done now. It is somewhat voluntary. It can be cash. It can be in kind, as we've seen today with some of the electrical services. And we do allow exceptions as well, to providing matches. Let's say you're a community that maybe can't afford it, and we do ask you to give us some sort of justification of that. But the other way of approaching this is to ask for a certain percentage, as we've talked about earlier as well. So, there's two ways to approach this. We can do this on a voluntary basis, ask for cash or in kind, or we can ask for a certain percentage. Now, why would we want to ask for a certain percentage? Well, we may want to sort of frame it for them rather than having them try to guess at what a good number is that, the committees might approve. Give them a number to go by. Some sort of certain percentage, and they might appreciate that. I mean, these are all very small towns, they're busy folks, and they'd like to have some sort of guidelines. The main thing we don't want to do is burden them. I mean, 90% of the towns in Kansas are less than 5,000 people, so these are large budgets, or these dollars can be large and impactful to their budgets. So we just want to make sure that we are not deterring anyone from applying for a grant.
Any questions for Mr. Volz? I would say in the discussion that we had in previous meetings, obviously as Representative Hoffman alluded to, I mean, we made it apparent that a match is going to look increasingly better on an application. In some of the conversations, I know that Representative Vaughn has expressed this, as I would say I would agree with her too. When this was created, when this was introduced in the governor's budget, it was to help communities draw down additional federal dollars. What we've seen in some of the applications that we've been submitted is using the Build Kansas fund by some communities, and I'm not going to say who, but as a slush fund. So they didn't have to come up with the matching dollars. And this does not prohibit any community or city across the state of Kansas to directly apply to the federal government. But they, I think, are using this fund, which we actually had to make a vote in April because we had overextended ourselves, to have the State Finance Council come back and cover if all of these awards, which, as Representative Vaughn mentioned before, the percentage ratio is very, very low. But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of the funds that we have on the state level that we're trying to draw down the federal dollars. And so the discussion that we had today in regards to match, I think was a relevant one. And I think we do need to be a little bit more, I don't want to say critical of the applications and possibly modifying the question that says, briefly describe your efforts to find other available funding sources for this project. Maybe be more specific in the application process going forward and saying, okay, could you come up with a match? Mm-hmm. Which obviously, I mean, the one I'm looking at right now is that we've looked at our budget and we see we cannot afford the match. How? You just said that 90% of the cities in the state of Kansas are less than 5,000 people. The largest community in my district is 4,500, and they could come up with a match. So I think we've kind of opened it up to use this fund as a way of going around directly applying to the federal government, using this for a match so they can ease up some cash. I think it's only prudent that we do have some type of a match. And I think it's within the bounds of this committee to say, you know, we think you probably could come up with something. We'll go ahead and forward your application on, and if it's subject to approval by the federal government, that match is going to be in place. So it's not necessarily impeding on the application date deadline, but it'd be saying, if approved by the federal government, we expect to come up with a match. I would also say, if they come back with financial information saying, no, we cannot sustain the match that you guys had agreed upon, then we could have that discussion at a later date before the state treasurer accessed the funds for the grant. That's just my personal opinion on how this should be working. Because I will say, and I know Senator Clay's expressed some consternation with the first few applications that we had, because nobody was coming with a match. It was solely using the Build Kansas program. Now, we tried to make some changes to that this last legislative session. However, those efforts were vetoed. But I still think that as a reviewing body of these applications, and basically being the stewards of the $50 million that we're allocating for over the next 4 years for this program, I believe it's within our confines to say, look, we'll move your application forward, but you know what, we think you probably come up with a match, and if you can't, we will discuss that at a later date. Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I totally agree. I too have, I think the largest town in my district is somewhere around 5,000, maybe 6,000, down to 400 or down to 42 people, you know, for some of the little areas. On some of these that we've looked at, say even like $23,000, if it's an important enough project to them, and they're going to get like or $2 million out of it, you can bet they're going to find the $23,000 if it's important enough for them. Because I've talked to enough of them who are, I've said, have you looked at the Build Kansas? And I'm getting a lot of negativity from most of these little towns is saying, we've looked and there's nothing, you know, the projects that we're wanting to do aren't there. So we're still trying to find $2 or $3 million of our own money to be able to do projects. So yeah, if they can only have to pay $23,000 and get $2 million, they're going to do it. So I agree. I think that we're asking for a very small amount for them to be able to draw down this money. So I hope that we can put in place some sort of a match. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think when we first organized this meeting, my understanding was, and I'm not sure for everybody else, was that the state funds were going to be the local match because the Johnson counties, the Sedgwick counties, all of these counties with large populations are probably already applying for those, and they don't need anything else from the state. So they're already applying for those funds. And the intent was that the state would be the local match for those federal funds, for those communities that can't afford to do the application on their own, because we are talking about millions of dollars, and 20% of a certain number might be too expensive for them, too much for them to handle in their budget. I don't mind having this discussion. I think my frustration was we were changing the rules where some people got millions of dollars without any local match because it was considered, let's say, a slush fund of sorts. And then some we are putting in arbitrary percentages here and there all over the place. And I don't think that's fair to those communities that are seeking these funds. And I think this discussion probably should have happened 6 months ago. And if we are going to discuss this at this point, some of the ones we even approved today, some had a match, some didn't, and they went through. It's not in good faith for us to say, well, they didn't follow it, they didn't put in, they didn't have any ownership of the grant, they just did it for whatever reason. But that was our ask, so that's partially on us. If we are going to look at some kind of criteria for local matches, and we are talking about very small communities that are also applying, we need to discuss what in-kind looks like. Are we going to put a certain percent to what in-kind matches, electrical and all of this look like, and all of those? Define it clearly so that even the steering committee, it doesn't go through the steering committee it can have a stopping point there if it hasn't met those criteria points. So I think we need to have that very explicit, exactly what it is we are asking for, whether it's in numbers or percentages on these. Thank you.
Representative Helgerson.
Senator highlighted many of the things I was going to say. I think there is a need, as I visited with a couple of the members, for further explanation as to what the local match, define what that is. I'm not opposed to having some kind of local match, but I think it needs to be clearly defined. And I also think that there's probably, I can't say this, there's a perspective among the majority of this group and a different perspective among other individuals that are spelling out what the program is at the local level. Does that kind of explain? I think they may be getting two different messages. We're changing it, as the senator said, which is not, in my mind, comfortable, because they've been operating under one set of scenarios, and we're being backed up into the last day when they have to put in the federal grant, grant application. I'm comfortable if we define what is a local match, and especially if we tell them, hey, why don't you submit it a month ahead of time or 2 months ahead of time, get it ready, and if we kind of had some kind of a offshoot or an opportunity for them to say, hey, there's no way we can come up with any money. We can always amend it, but tell them as a starting point that maybe a small percentage of matching, and clearly define if that's federal dollars that they've received that can be used as the match, or if it's local tax dollars. And, this is what, first year of 5 years? Is that right? 4? Oh, who knows? We'll probably do it, extend it like everything else. So I understand that. I think it's sad that there are going to be some grants that aren't going to be agreed to because we've changed the rules a little bit, but make a decision on what the priority is on the matching, and let's go forward and give everybody the direction, whether or not it's 1%, 2%, or 10%. No, I'm not making a motion. Yeah, I'm done.
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would not be in favor of having a universal umbrella percentage amount that we apply. I think we can, I would potentially be in favor of having a percentage that we encourage communities to try and match, but I would be more in favor of what's proposed in this slide here of having communities provide what they can, changing the expectation that before there was no, need for a local match, whereas now we're saying, okay, we would like to see some kind of skin in the game, but not doing any kind of universal percentage, and allowing for those exceptions if communities truly cannot afford to do the match or have other urgent needs for that money at a local level and could really benefit from the state funds as their local match. I think we have to have, I think as others have been saying, I'm fine, changing this expectation around match, but I don't, different communities can afford different things. So I just don't want to do something universal that would dissuade a local community from applying. But that potentially we can let them know moving forward that we would like to see some skin in the game. And those would be my preferences for this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Schallenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I agree with her. And I was the mayor until I was a senator. I've told this story in the Senate, so you folks get to hear it. I was the mayor of Baxter Springs until I became a senator. It's a town of 4,300. And there were many federal grants we just didn't apply for because we knew a 20% match was a $5 million project, something we just couldn't do. And so this is very helpful. But we also knew we could do something. And but there wasn't an option. There wasn't an option to put in $20,000 for a $2 million proposal. So, and there was in kind, and let me give you an example of in kind. We got a sidewalk grant once, and they allowed the city to tear up all the old stuff. So we tore up all the old sidewalks. We hauled everything off, and that was pretty costly. And the city could do that because we had the trucks, we had the helpers, we had the backhoes, we had the front end loaders, and we could do it. So I think if we make a good description of what in kind might look like, and tell people that to be considered, you really should consider putting in a local match. Those who can afford 5% will know it. Those who can afford more will do it. But the city of Topeka, for example, should be able to do, if they want to put bike paths everywhere, they should be able to come up with a little money. And if you don't require any local effort at all, you're just asking people to apply for everything they can apply for because it doesn't cost them anything. So I'm for some kind of a description. I'd make a motion if I knew what I wanted to say, but I think we ought to do something.
Well, and I have to say, I agree with Representative Vaughn as well. I don't want to affix a percentage because that would deter a lot of your smaller communities from even applying and saying, well, even if it's a smaller amount, 5%, it's going to be very difficult for a town of 50 people to try to apply for something. However, looking at the questions that are on the applications, I mean, nothing really expresses, have you explored a local match? I mean, we talk about ARPA money, Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. And then we talk about other monies that might be available, and then it's like, what was your efforts for the available funding? I think we can elaborate on that. And as Senator Schallenberger said, I mean, probably the one application that I liked the best today was the community, and I can't remember which one it was now, that said, we're going to have an in-kind electrical work. They knew that they couldn't come up with a match, but they were willing to put something into the game, and it's going to have a monetary cost to them because they're going to have personnel out there if they are awarded this project. And that application probably had more importance to me today because they actually understood that they had to have some type of skin in the game. And then we have much larger communities. Going back to the first application that we had, was like, well, we could come up with the money, but we'd like to get it from here first. That's what we need to stop. If they can come up with the money and use it as a local match, then they can move forward with the application process and not use the Build Kansas program. For that smaller community that was saying we can do an in-kind contribution of electrical work, had, like I said, more of an impact to me because they realized that they needed to have something in order to try to get this application approved. So again, I'm going to reiterate, I agree with Representative Vaughn, Senator Schallenberger. I believe Senator Reddy kind of had the same, and Representative Helgerson. I don't really want to put a fixed amount for a match, but I think the infrastructure hub needs to explore the match possibility, whatever that may look like. And moving forward on the applications from this date on, that is going to be a criteria for the applications, is what have you explored as far as being a possible match, whatever that may look like. Because this program may have been, I think the intention when it was in the governor's budget was to help smaller communities who have infrastructure needs, whether that be sewer, roads, airports, whatever the case may be. But we've seen applications from all over the state. We've seen applications from Johnson County. We've seen applications from Sedgwick. We've seen from the larger communities in our state. It's just not the 90% that are less than 5,000 people. And so I think there needs to be some type of structure in regards to a match. And I think when we review those applications, and I would say probably prior to our next meeting, which is going to be around, I think, Merle had something about like August 16th. We do our due diligence and look at those applications and analyze them. And I would like to see this subject matter changed because most of these are falling on page 6 in regards to what have you tried to explore as a possible match? And then this will be the discussion, just kind of like we had today, which I will have to say, Representative Hoffman kind of threw me a curveball. I didn't know he was going to make these motions where we're going to start having a discussion about matches and everything. I knew we were going to have a topic discussion of matches, but I think moving forward, communities are going to be aware we're just not going to rubber stamp anything. Because like he mentioned before in his comments, if that's what we're going to do, we don't need to meet. But at the same time, this advisory committee, we are the stewards of the $200 million that we're going to be allocating for the next 4 years. And we don't want to overexhaust that. We want to be prudent, but we also want to be, I'll say, I'm going to look at Senator Reddy, consistently fair to all the communities across the state of Kansas. And moving forward, I think there is, I'm not going to say there's a requirement for a match, but there needs to be a high exploration for each community and each application of trying to identify match dollars or, as Senator Schallenberg mentioned, in kind. Any further discussion? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with you. I think, though, I don't know where the discussion goes from here, but I would certainly like to give, if this committee is open to it, already explore what that in-kind looks like. So we don't have another meeting and say, well, that doesn't count as in-kind. I think we need to have that criteria set up as examples of what in-kind looks like before we have that meeting and have that discussion. So we're not, again, kind of telling people that's not what we meant. So I don't know how you want to go.
Well, and I would probably say, even in other types of in-kind donations, for example, a community in my district was awarded the seed grant money. And they did an in-kind contribution to try to meet the match required for the seed grant of labor. And so they assessed, okay, we're going to have this many people working for about 8 hours a day to construct the park, and you can affix a monetary value to that. It's not that difficult. And this is a community of 90 people. So you can't tell me that a larger community can't assess a value to an in-kind contribution. That would be an example that I would be looking at. Is what's the work that's going to be done and what's the assessment of the cost that it would be? And like for that application that we had today, I mean, how many of your electrical department personnel are going to be going out there and putting up poles, or I can't remember exactly the examples that you used, but there is a monetary cost to that. And there's probably just going to have to be a little bit more of an analysis done prior to the application, or if the infrastructure hub sees an in-kind match, then they would say, okay, we need a monetary value. Give us some type of monetary value of what you believe that in-kind contribution is going to cost. Is that fair? Yes. Right. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And aren't there in most of these federal grants already provisions for in-kind contributions?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's definitions of what in-kind contributions represent.
Yeah, absolutely. In-kind contributions can be labor, like you mentioned, can be materials, can be services, can be right-of-way, can be property. Yeah, those are all qualified as in-kind contributions. And I'm glad you brought the city of Chapman up, that in-kind that they were giving. I mean, that got to me too. I mean, I liked the fact that they were willing to pitch in and do that project. And the other part of having an in-kind contribution, or even just a part of the match, is you're going to get more buy-in from that applicant. They're going to have more ownership of that application. Potentially, you could actually see better applications going in to the federal government, which will lead to more success for us.
And maybe what we need in our application is the amount of in-kind contribution and a description of what that is. Like it would have helped us on that one if we would have had a dollar amount for those hookups. And you know they've got that.
Oh, it's easy to assess that, yes.
And I guess my other point is, you know, since this thing started originally in House Appropriations, I think, this format at least, it was always my understanding that we were going to help the smallest communities the most that we could, but that we wanted to be the last resort for these cost shares. You know, we wanted to help the communities that needed to help. And I know when we started on this, it seemed like all of a sudden a couple of people made contributions, or they put some skin in the game. And then all of a sudden it started to be one of those things, well, the communities that weren't putting skin in the game, they were getting it too. So at a certain point it became, you know, why am I putting money into it if I'm going to get it approved anyway? And I think that's always the problem when we don't require a minimum contribution, is we go down that slippery slope, and then at the end of the day, nobody's making everybody's asking us to do the maximum contribution. So again, I understand all of your concerns. And I want to say one other thing. I look at all of these differently. If it's a health and safety improvement, I look at the ask differently than if it's a quality of life contribution. You know, if somebody needs tornado sirens and it's a small town, I look at it a lot different than if we're doing, you know, $3 million worth of bike trails. And that's just me personally. And I also look at it a little bit different when we have these large rural electric co-ops, you know, that are big business. They're not for profit, but they're big business, and they come in and there's no local match at all. And I just feel like we've really got out of what we really intended here to help the people that needed the help the most. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree. 5% may not be the right number, but I do think that we need to specify that going forward, there must be a quantifiable in-kind or match. We don't have to put 5%, but there's got to be something. Because if we don't put, if we just say, you know, well, we're asking that you do, we're gonna be back in the same situation again, because as they come in, they're gonna, you can always justify why you don't have money to do something. And I think even the smallest community can put in in kind. So, you know, I don't know if we say up to 5% or something like that, but I do think that we need to say there has to be an in kind or not just say it's in kind, but some sort of a monetarily qualified in kind contribution or cash for us to go forward on these. I just feel like that if we don't, we're going to be back in the same situation.
Secretary Reed, did you have anything you wanted to say? Because you moved up into the front row. Oh, okay, all right.
Actually, I do have one comment.
Yes, go ahead, Secretary Reed.
Thank you again. Great conversation. Just so you know, these are active conversations that are going on in the hub and the steering committee too, and we appreciate the direction and the advice of this committee, and we'll take it into account as we start looking at these applications that come forward. I think the most important part of the conversation is really to be able to communicate expectations to the communities that are applying. I think everybody sees the need for that. I think I'll also just say that we all knew that there was going to have to be a little bit of recalibration or resetting of expectations after a certain amount of time with this program, because when it was set up, we didn't know what the demand was going to be. We didn't know who was going to be applying and really what the issues were going to come out of it. I think we're starting to find some of those out, and you know, we're going to be flexible to try to make sure that we're getting the most benefit out of this dollar. I think we all understand that. My ask of the committee is this: if you would consider your vote on the two that you denied and allow the hub to go back and, rather than denying them outright, give them the opportunity to commit to a local match before a denial. So basically table them and us bring them back as either a match or not match, so you guys can have a further vote on it.
Well, I would probably contend that we don't, anything that we do here as far as an I-9 application does not prohibit you from going back to the communities and saying, hey, we need to have another application.
Okay.
And it needs to be restructured.
Okay.
That does not prohibit you from doing that.
Okay.
I don't want to table them because then they're sitting out there on the side. We've already taken action, so the hub can go back to Dodge City and Topeka, those are the two,
Yep.
and say, look, you need to restructure your application.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that before we made that action. So as long as the committee is okay with that, I think we would like to be able to do that.
All right.
All right, that's
You all
all I
right with
have.
that? No. Senator Schallenberger, do you have a question? Representative Helgerson.
I thought, though, that the two applications had a deadline for tomorrow. So you're thinking of a different grant application to a different proposal.
Yeah, and I was going to add on to what Secretary Reed said. Is there a way we could conditionally approve them if we were able to get them to commit to that 5%?
Well, I would say the first one, though, had some flaws in the application.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing prohibits them from applying for it by themselves when they already have the money.
Yeah, you're talking about the railroad grant?
Yes.
Yeah, that one, yeah. No, I was talking
They
about.
can go ahead and apply for that one because they have the matching dollars
Yeah,
for the federal
I think
grant.
we denied one of the active transportation infrastructure grants. If we could get them to commit the 5%, and could we conditionally approve that? But that'll take a little bit of, me making some calls, right now, because these things are, like you said, they're due tomorrow.
Well, the one though where we required a match, this is my impression, but I might have to have the maker of the motion express this, but to me, it was a conditional approval that if it's approved by the federal government, then you have to come up with a 1% or 5%, whatever was discussed and passed by the committee. That was denied. That was denied. But we had two that had conditional changes.
So, okay.
You just mentioned the one with the 5%. Representative Hoffman.
Right. Are you talking about the one that we decreased it by 5%? Or are you talking about the ones that we?
One was Coffeyville.
Yeah, one was Coffeyville and then one was Topeka. Coffeyville, we just lowered it by 5%.
Okay.
Topeka, I think we said no totally.
You said no totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
So which one are you talking?
Topeka.
Topeka, okay. I guess I'll make a motion that if they will come back with showing monetary in-kind or some sort of a cash up to 5%, then we will pay the rest of it.
All right, committee
That's a
heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Representative Francis. Discussion on the motion. Representative Helgerson.
This is for the bike lanes, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Senator Reddy.
Yes, sorry, is this so the local match on that was 20%, and they asked for 3.3 million. Are we asking 5% of the 3.3 million or 5% of not the 13 million?
Yeah. So what we recommend is 5% of the Build Kansas Fund ask. So in this case, they're asking for a Build Kansas Fund ask of 3.3 million. So, roughly they were talking about, just over $150,000 as 5%.
Thank you.
Representative Vaughn, did you have a question or discussion on the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to recommend a motion if Representative Hoffman did not. So I would,
Right.
I did want to clarify, was his original motion to include a percentage, or was it the original, or I'm sorry, not his original motion. Was the motion Representative Hoffman made just now to include a percentage match, or was it for the city of Topeka to include some kind of match or in kind in order to move the application
I
forward?
believe it was 5%, but is that correct? And that could be in the form of cash, in kind, or however they assess the local match.
Okay, so that would equal about $166,402 in local contributions.
Seems like you have a calculator right there, but yeah.
I wanted to make sure I did math correctly, but yeah.
Yes, that would be it, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, Representative Hoffman, you may close.
I close.
All right, committee, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion passes. So, any other discussion in regards to matches or any questions by the Secretary or Mr. Bolts? Senator Schallenberger.
I'm just, so where are we?
So I think,
You're instructing them to come up with some language? Do you have language?
no, I think from the discussion here, we don't need to have a formal motion. I think from the consensus and the discussion that we had is that moving forward on applications, we are going to ask for some type of match, whether that be in kind or in cash. Obviously, if it's in cash, we know what the value of that local match is. If it's in kind, they have to do an assessment and they have to assess a value on how much that would possibly be. So going forward, applications from the infrastructure hub, and if there isn't a match, then they will be, the community or city will be contacted back and say, okay, we need to have some type of match, or if you can't come up with a match, you have to have a pretty detailed explanation as to why. More than we just don't have the funds. Anybody could say that. So then, if it passes the infrastructure hub and it comes to us, and I'm going to reiterate, I think we need to change these questions here, especially on page 6, on most of the applications. And I would say then the final discretion on what happens with that match, or if there isn't one, we have a discussion here before we move it on. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like for you to send us what that looks like. You said the federal guidelines already have ideas or examples of what in-kind looks like. So when we go back to our communities, we can say, hey, that might be eligible. You should go ahead and contact the tech assistant to help you with this. But I for myself, want to be more knowledgeable what in-kind looks like as examples. There might be more, I understand that, but I need to have an understanding of what we are looking for and how we might assess them in the future. Thank you.
So that's how we're going to move forward right now in regards to matching dollars, whether that be actually in cash or whether it be in kind. But I think, and then we're going to have, like we kind of did today, a detailed discussion about the applications. And if they get denied, they get denied. Obviously, they can come back from the dead too, because we just approved one. But that's how we're going to move forward from July 16th on. And we'll I hate to say this, we'll see how it goes. But we do implore the infrastructure hub to ask the communities or those seeking an application about matching dollars. And this is my own personal opinion. I'm not going to speak on the committee, but it's my own personal opinion. But if there is an application where they say, well, we have the dollars, but we just want to get it from the Build Kansas Fund, I really think the infrastructure hub should send that back to the community and say, no, we're not going to do that if they have the dollars for it. If there's anything, I'm going to say this also, the revisers hasn't been poking me on the shoulder saying, sir, you can't say that. So I'm assuming everything I said is legitimate. Okay. All right. Until our next meeting, which I believe is going to be around the middle of August, we are adjourned.